Before we dive in, it is critical to understand that this video is for informational purposes only and does not constitute professional educational advice. The decision of where to send your child to school is a deeply personal one. We are not educators or child development experts. Our goal is to present the facts, data, and arguments from all sides to empower you. We strongly encourage you to conduct your own local research, visit schools, and consult with educational professionals to make the best choice for your unique family situation. Imagine you're standing in a hallway, and in front of you are two doors. Behind door number 1 is your local neighborhood public school. It's the school your property taxes support. It's where the kids down the street go. It's familiar, it's a cornerstone of the community, and it represents a tradition as old as the nation itself. Behind door number 2 is a charter school. Maybe it has a sleek, modern website. It promises a specialized curriculum, smaller class sizes, and a unique educational philosophy. Feels new, innovative, maybe even a little exclusive. Both doors are unlocked. Both are options for your child. But you can only choose one. And the choice you make feels monumental, like it could set the entire trajectory for your child's future. Which door do you open? This isn't just a hypothetical. For millions of American parents, this is a real, stressful, and often confusing decision they face every single year. The debate between charter schools and traditional public schools has become one of the most heated, politically charged, and misunderstood battlegrounds in modern America. It's a conflict filled with passionate advocates, furious critics, confusing statistics, and a whole lot of noise. Our mission with this video is to cut through that noise. We are going to give you the ultimate, unbiased guide to understanding this critical choice. We're going to arm you with the facts, demystify the jargon, and lay out the strongest arguments for and against both systems. By the end of this, you won't just have an opinion. You'll have a deep understanding of how these two educational models work, who they serve, and what their true impact is on students and communities across the country. This is the definitive breakdown you need to make an informed decision, not one based on headlines or hearsay. So let's start with the absolute basics, because you can't understand the fight until you know the fighters. First, let's talk about the reigning champion, the institution that has educated the vast majority of Americans for over a century, the traditional public school. When you think of the yellow school bus, the Friday night football games, the Parent-Teacher Association bake sales, you're thinking of the traditional public school system. These schools are the bedrock of our educational landscape. Their funding comes directly from you, the taxpayer, through a combination of local property taxes, state funding, and federal dollars. This is a crucial point. Their purpose, their mandate, is to serve everyone. They are legally obligated to accept every single child who lives within their designated district boundaries, regardless of their academic ability, their behavior, their socioeconomic background, or any special needs they may have. This is the foundational promise of American public education, a free, accessible education for all. Their governance is also fundamentally public. They are run by a locally elected school board, made up of members of your own community. These board members hire a superintendent, who then manages the principals and teachers. This structure is designed, in theory, to make the schools directly accountable to the citizens they serve. If you don't like how the schools are being run, you can vote the school board out. The teachers are typically public employees, often part of a union, with state-certified credentials and a salary and benefits package determined by a collective bargaining agreement. The curriculum is guided by state standards, and the entire operation is transparent, subject to public records laws and open meetings. It is, by its very nature, a government-run, community-owned institution. Now let's turn to the challenger, the charter school. This is where the confusion really begins for most people. What exactly is a charter school? The simplest way to think about it is this. Charter schools are publicly funded, but they are privately operated. Let's break that down. Like a traditional public school, they receive taxpayer money to operate. They cannot, and this is a huge point of confusion, charge tuition. They are public schools in the sense that they are funded by the public and are open to the public. However, they are operated not by a democratically elected school board, but by an independent, often nonprofit, board of directors. Sometimes, these boards will hire for-profit companies, known as education management organizations or EMOs, to handle the day-to-day operations. The charter in their name refers to a literal contract or charter that they sign with an authorizer, usually the state, a university, or the local school district. This contract outlines the school's mission, its academic goals, its financial plan, and how it will measure success. In exchange for meeting those goals, the charter school is granted freedom and flexibility from many of the regulations that traditional public schools must follow. This can include rules about the length of the school day, the hiring of non-union teachers, and curriculum design. Because they are schools of choice, they don't have assigned district boundaries. Any student can apply. If more students apply than there are available seats, which is very common, the school is legally required to hold a random lottery to determine who gets in. They cannot cherry-pick students based on test scores or interviews. The core idea, the grand promise of the charter school movement, is that this autonomy will foster innovation. The thinking is that by freeing schools from bureaucratic red tape, they can experiment with new teaching methods, create specialized learning environments, like a focus on STEM, or the arts or project-based learning, and ultimately create better educational outcomes. If they succeed, their charter is renewed. If they fail to meet the goals in their contract, they can be shut down. This accountability through performance is, in theory, the central pillar of the charter model. The origin of this idea is fascinating and often surprising to people on both sides of the debate. The concept wasn't born from a desire to privatize education. It was first championed in the late 1980s by a man named Albert Shanker, who was the president of the American Federation of Teachers, one of the nation's largest teachers' unions. Shanker envisioned charter schools as small, experimental laboratories run by teachers within the existing public school system. They would be places to test out new ideas, and if those ideas worked, they could then be shared and scaled across the entire district to benefit all students. It was a vision of innovation from within. But over the last 3 decades, that original vision has evolved dramatically. The charter school movement has exploded, growing from a handful of schools in the early 90s to over 7,800 schools today, educating more than 3.7 million students. It has become a multi-billion-dollar sector, attracting massive philanthropic donations and fierce political support. And along the way, it's morphed from a small-scale experiment into a full-blown, parallel school system that directly competes with the traditional public system for students and for the tax dollars that follow them. So now we have the two models on the table: the traditional public school, the government-run, community-owned institution designed to serve everyone, and the charter school, the publicly funded, privately managed institution designed for innovation and choice. Both are funded by your tax dollars. Both are vying for your child. The battle between them raises fundamental questions about the very purpose of public education. Is it a public good meant to create a common experience and level the playing field for all citizens? Or is it a marketplace of options where parental choice and competition drive quality? The answer is far from simple, and the stakes couldn't be higher. To truly understand which model delivers on its promise, we have to go deeper. We need to follow the money, scrutinize the test scores, examine who gets a seat in the classroom, and who gets left behind. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We'll start by tackling the most contentious part of this entire debate: the funding. How does money flow to these schools, and is one system draining the lifeblood from the other? The truth is far more complex and frankly more shocking than you might think. To understand this fight, you have to follow the money. And that money trail starts in a place you know very well: your own wallet. Look at your property tax bill. See that line item for local schools? For generations, that was the bedrock of American education. It was a simple, powerful contract. You pay taxes to your community, and that money, combined with state and federal funds, builds and runs the schools in your neighborhood. The money is tied to the place. This system creates a direct, tangible link between a community and its schools. The high school football stadium, the elementary school playground, the salaries for the teachers who live down the street, it's all funded by a collective neighborhood pot. The more valuable the property in a district, generally, the more money in the pot. It's a system built on geography and shared investment. Then, charter schools came along and flipped the entire table over. They introduced a radically different, and to many, a revolutionary idea. The money shouldn't be tied to the building. The money should be tied to the child. This is the single most important concept in the entire funding debate. It's called per pupil funding, and it works like this. The state calculates that it costs, say, $12,000 to educate one student for 1 year. Under the charter school model, that $12,000 becomes a kind of educational voucher. It's attached to the student, not the local school district. So if a child named Sarah leaves her traditional public school, PS 101, to attend the new Innovate Academy charter school across town, that $12,000 of public money goes with her. It is electronically withdrawn from PS 101's budget, and deposit it into Innovate academies. On the surface, the charter school argument for this is incredibly compelling. It's about choice and accountability. They ask, why should a child's educational destiny be determined by their zip code? If the local public school isn't working for Sarah, why should it get to keep the public funds allocated for her education? The money, they argue, is for the child's learning, not for propping up a specific institution. It's a free market approach to education. The schools that attract the most students, the ones presumably doing the best job, get the most funding. The ones that don't either have to improve or they risk closing their doors. It introduces competition into a system that, for 100 years, was a geographic monopoly. It empowers parents, turning them from passive participants into active consumers. But for the traditional public school system, this isn't a clean, simple transaction. It's a slow, steady bleed. This is the heart of their argument, and you have to see it from their perspective. Imagine PS 101 is a massive building. It has a principal, a librarian, 2 guidance counselors, a nurse, and a heating bill for 100,000 square feet. It has fixed costs. Now, Sarah leaves for the charter school, and her $12,000 goes with her. Then 10 more students leave. Then 20. Suddenly, PS 101 has lost over $250,000 in funding. But here's the problem. Its costs aren't shrinking at the same rate. The principal still needs a full salary. The library is still there and needs a librarian. You can't fire 1/10 of a school nurse. The building's heating bill doesn't go down just because a few classrooms have fewer students. These are called stranded costs. The massive, immovable expenses of running a school that don't disappear when enrollment dips. The public school advocates say this isn't fair competition. It's a death spiral. As more students leave, the budget gets tighter. As the budget gets tighter, they have to cut programs, art, music, advanced placement classes. As those programs disappear, the school becomes less attractive, and more parents look for alternatives, like charter schools. And the cycle continues. They argue that charters are essentially cherry-picking students and funding, leaving the traditional public schools to educate the remaining students, often those with the most profound special needs or behavioral challenges, who are more expensive to educate, with a fraction of the necessary resources. They see it as a system designed to dismantle, not improve public education. But the charter school advocates fire back. They say the stranded costs argument is just an excuse for inefficiency and a refusal to adapt. They point out that for decades, public school districts have been losing enrollment to surrounding suburbs or private schools, and they've had to adjust. Why is this any different? Furthermore, they have a massive financial burden that public schools don't. Facilities. This is a critical point that gets lost in the noise. Your local public school was most likely built using a public bond, a massive loan that taxpayers agreed to pay back over decades specifically for construction. Charter schools almost never have this power. They can't just ask the taxpayers to build them a building. So, where does the money for their schoolhouse, their gym, their science labs come from? It has to come out of that same $12,000 per pupil check. The money that's supposed to pay for teachers and textbooks is also being used to pay rent to a landlord or a mortgage on a commercial property. Think about that. The charter school is often paying for its building out of its operating budget, while the public school next door has its building essentially paid for by a separate public fund. So, who is really at a financial disadvantage? The charter argument is that if they were funded equitably, including facilities, they could do even more. They're not just siphoning money. They're trying to do the same job with fewer resources, all while paying for their own roof. And the complexity doesn't stop there. The very way students are counted can turn into a financial game of hot potato. In many states, funding is based on enrollment on a specific day in October. If a student is enrolled in the public school on count day, the district gets that $12,000 for the entire year. But what if that student transfers to a charter school in November? For the next 10 months, the charter school is responsible for educating that child, but the public school keeps the money. These are called phantom students. And for charter schools, it's a constant battle to get the funding for the children they are actually teaching. This financial tug-of-war is brutal, and it's happening in districts all across the country. One side sees a system bleeding out, drained of lifeblood by unregulated competition. The other side sees a revolutionary model of choice and accountability, fighting for its fair share against an entrenched, monopolistic bureaucracy. And lurking in the shadows of this debate is an even more explosive question. Where is all this public money ultimately going? Is it going into a nonprofit's classroom? Or into the pockets of a for-profit corporation that runs the charter school like a business? The battle over money is really a battle over philosophy, but funding is only half the story. The other half is about rules. If a charter school takes public money, does that make it a public school? Is it held to the same standards? Does it have to play by the same rulebook when it comes to accepting students, disciplining them, and being transparent with its results? The answer to that question is where the fight for the soul of American education truly begins. Let's start with the fundamental difference, the one that underpins every single argument for and against charter schools. It's a simple but explosive concept: autonomy. A traditional public school is a government-run institution, bound by a thicket of local, state, and federal regulations. It answers to a publicly elected school board, its teachers are usually unionized, and its curriculum is often dictated by the district. It is, for better or worse, a bureaucracy. A charter school, on the other hand, is born from a contract, a charter, with an authorizer, which could be a state agency, a university, or a local school district. This charter grants the school freedom from many of the regulations that govern traditional public schools. Freedom to innovate, freedom to specialize, freedom to hire and fire teachers based on performance, not just seniority, freedom to set its own curriculum, its own school calendar, and its own culture. This is the grand promise of the charter school movement. Proponents will tell you this is how you break the mold. You can't fix a broken system by following its broken rules. You need to create something new, something nimble and responsive to the needs of its students. Imagine a school focused entirely on STEM, where the school day is 2 hours longer to allow for robotics labs and coding classes. Or a school built around arts and humanities, where students learn history by writing and performing plays. Or a school with a no-excuses culture of strict discipline and high expectations, designed to prepare students from disadvantaged backgrounds for the rigors of college. These are the kinds of specialized environments that charter schools can create, thanks to their autonomy. They are, in theory, the laboratories of innovation that the entire public education system was supposed to learn from. And for many families, this is an irresistible draw. If your local public school is underperforming, overcrowded, or simply not a good fit for your child, the existence of a charter school can feel like a lifeline. It's a choice. And in America, we love choice. But here is where the battle lines are drawn. Because with that freedom, with that autonomy, comes a different set of rules. And the first and most contentious is the front door. How do you get in? By law, charter schools are public schools. They cannot charge tuition, and they cannot use selective admissions tests like a private school would. If they have more applicants than seats, and the most popular ones always do, they must hold a random lottery. On the surface, this sounds like the fairest system imaginable. Every child has an equal shot. A name is pulled from a hat, and a life is potentially changed. It's a powerful and compelling image. The reality, however, is far more complex. Critics argue that charter schools engage in a practice known as cream skimming or cherry picking. They may not be able to handpick the highest scoring students, but they can, and often do, create application and enrollment processes that subtly filter for the most motivated and well-supported families. The lottery itself isn't biased, but the pool of applicants who enter the lottery might be. Think about it. The application might be long and complicated. There might be mandatory information sessions held on a weeknight, which can be impossible for a single parent working 2 jobs to attend. The school might require a high level of parental involvement, like 20 or 30 volunteer hours per year. They might not provide transportation or serve free and reduced-price lunch, effectively excluding the poorest families. None of these things are an admissions test, but together they act as a hidden barrier. They are a test of a family's resources, of their social capital, of their ability to navigate a complex system. The families that successfully jump through these hoops are, by definition, more likely to be highly engaged in their child's education. And that's a massive advantage for any school before a single lesson is even taught. This leads to a well-documented phenomenon. On average, charter schools enroll a smaller percentage of students with severe disabilities, students who are English language learners, and students from the most deeply impoverished backgrounds compared to the neighborhood public schools they draw from. These are the most challenging and most expensive students to educate. So while the charter school down the street might be posting incredible test scores, the public school next door is left with an even higher concentration of the neediest students. The public school has a legal and moral obligation to educate every single child who walks through its doors, no matter their background, their ability, or their behavior. A charter school in practice does not always share that same burden. And that brings us to the back door. What happens once a student is in? This is where the no excuses philosophy comes into play. In these schools, the culture is paramount. Strict rules govern everything from how you walk in the hallway, to how you sit at your desk, to how you address a teacher. The goal is to eliminate distractions and create an orderly, focused environment where learning can happen. For many students, especially those coming from chaotic home environments, this structure is a godsend. It provides the safety and predictability they need to thrive. The results can be spectacular. These schools often see dramatic gains in test scores and send a high percentage of their graduates, most of whom are low-income minority students, to college. But there is a dark side to this approach. Critics point to staggeringly high suspension and expulsion rates at many no-excuses charter schools. A minor infraction like having your shirt untucked or talking out of turn can result in being sent home. This zero-tolerance approach can be particularly harsh on students with undiagnosed behavioral issues or trauma. And when these students are pushed out, where do they go? They go back to their local public school, which has to take them. This practice, sometimes called counseling out, allows charter schools to shed their most difficult students. It purges the dataset of low performers and behavior problems, which helps keep the school's test scores and glowing reputation intact. So you have a system where some schools can screen their intake and push out their challenges, while other schools must accept everyone and keep everyone. It's like a race where one runner gets to choose their track and is allowed to trip their opponents, while the other runner has to navigate an obstacle course with a weighted vest on. Can you still compare their finish times and declare a clear winner? This all ties into the third major point of contention: accountability and transparency. Who is watching the watchers? A traditional public school system is governed by a school board of elected officials from the community. Their meetings are public. Their budgets are public records. If you have a problem, you know who to call. You can vote them out. It's often messy and political, but it is, at its core, democratic. Charter schools operate in a gray area. They are publicly funded, but they are often privately managed, sometimes by nonprofit organizations, but increasingly by for-profit corporations. Their governing boards are typically appointed, not elected. Their meetings are not always open to the public. It can be incredibly difficult to find out exactly how they're spending taxpayer money. Are the funds going to teacher salaries and classroom supplies? Or are they going to exorbitant CEO salaries, marketing budgets, and payments to the parent corporation? This lack of transparency has led to numerous scandals involving fraud and mismanagement, where individuals have gotten rich off the public dime meant for educating children. So we're left with a paradox. The very autonomy that allows charter schools to be innovative and successful also allows them to create enrollment systems that are not entirely equitable, to enforce disciplinary codes that push out difficult students, and to operate with a level of financial secrecy that would be illegal in a traditional public school. The pro is the freedom to build something better. The con is that this freedom can be used to build a system that serves some children at the expense of others, all while the public that funds it is left in the dark. This lack of transparency isn't just a hypothetical problem. It has real-world consequences. Take the cautionary tale of the Galen Movement Charter Schools, one of the largest networks in the country. For years, federal and state investigators looked into allegations that these schools, publicly funded but privately managed, were funneling millions of taxpayer dollars to affiliated Turkish construction and supply companies. The FBI raided schools, audits were launched, and a complex web of financial relationships was slowly untangled. The accusation was that public money, meant for American students, was being used in sweetheart deals that benefited a specific network of insiders. Now, regardless of the ultimate legal outcomes in these specific cases, they highlight the central vulnerability. When a school is run by a private board, not an elected one, who is watching the money? Who ensures that contracts are awarded fairly, and not to a board member's brother-in-law? This question cuts to the very heart of the governance debate, the fundamental difference in who holds the power. Let's start with the charter school model. The pro here is one of focus and expertise. A traditional public school board is a group of elected officials. They might be passionate parents or concerned citizens, but they are often generalists. They have to oversee everything from elementary school reading programs to high school football stadiums, all while navigating the choppy waters of local politics. A charter school, on the other hand, is typically run by a nonprofit board of directors. This board is not elected, its members are chosen. This allows the school's founders to handpick a team of experts specifically aligned with the school's unique mission. If you're starting a STEM-focused charter, you can stack your board with engineers from Google, professors from MIT, and venture capitalists who know how to scale an organization. If your mission is arts integration, you can bring in museum curators, professional artists, and philanthropists from the arts world. This creates a leadership team with deep, relevant knowledge, a shared vision, and the ability to make decisions quickly. They're not trying to please a million different constituencies. They have one job: execute the school's mission as laid out in its charter. This is the nimble startup argument. They can pivot, adapt, and innovate without getting bogged down in the bureaucratic molasses that can sometimes paralyze a large school district. But the con is the flip side of that same coin. What happens when that unelected, self-selecting board isn't composed of benevolent experts, but of self-interested operators? Because they aren't directly elected by the public, accountability becomes a massive issue. Who do you complain to when things go wrong? With a public school, you can go to a board meeting, speak your mind at a public podium, and if you and your neighbors are angry enough, you can vote the board members out of office in the next election. That is a powerful, direct line of accountability. With a charter school, the board often appoints its own new members. They answer to the state authorizer that granted their charter, but that oversight can be distant and infrequent. And while charter school board meetings are often required to be public, the culture can be very different. It can feel less like a public forum, and more like the private meeting of a corporate board that you're simply allowed to observe. This structure can create an echo chamber, where dissent is discouraged and problems are handled internally, shielded from public scrutiny until they explode into a full-blown scandal. And this is where the lines get blurry. Many charter schools are run by nonprofits, but they often hire for-profit companies, known as charter management organizations or CMOs, to handle everything from curriculum to payroll. This can create complex financial arrangements where public tax dollars flow from the nonprofit school to the for-profit company, with very little transparency about how that money is spent or what profit margins are being made off the education of children. Now let's turn the lens on the traditional public school system. The greatest pro of its governance structure is right there in the name. It's public. It is a fundamental exercise in American democracy. The school board is a body of the people, by the people, for the people. Every dollar spent is, in theory, a public record. Every major decision is supposed to be debated in an open meeting, subject to state sunshine laws that guarantee public access. This system is designed for maximum transparency and direct accountability. If the district wants to close a neighborhood school, change the curriculum, or give the superintendent a big raise, they have to do it in the open. Parents, teachers, and taxpayers have the right to show up, to protest, to organize, and to make their voices heard. They have a direct lever of power: the ballot box. This democratic oversight is a powerful safeguard. It ensures that the schools remain fundamentally answerable to the community they serve. It's a messy, noisy process, but it's designed to prevent a small group of individuals from making unilateral decisions with billions of public dollars behind closed doors. It grounds the school in the community, making it a reflection of the local values and priorities. However, the con of this democratic process is that it can be incredibly inefficient, highly politicized, and resistant to change. School board elections are notoriously low turnout affairs. This means that a small but highly organized group, whether it's a teachers' union, an anti-tax group, or a faction of parents with a specific political agenda, can exert disproportionate influence and even take over a board. Suddenly, board meetings are no longer about student achievement. They become battlegrounds for the latest front in the culture wars, with hours spent debating issues that have little to do with reading, writing, and arithmetic. This political theater can lead to paralysis. Bold, innovative ideas that might actually help students can be shot down not because they are bad ideas, but because they are politically unpopular with a key voting bloc. Superintendents, who are supposed to be expert educational leaders, end up spending most of their time managing the political whims of their board members. This can lead to a risk-averse culture where the primary goal is not to rock the boat. The system designed for public accountability can become a system bogged down by public opinion, making it difficult to make the tough, long-term decisions necessary for real improvement. It's the messy town hall problem. Democracy is beautiful, but it's not always efficient or effective at running a complex organization like a school district. So we're left with a stark choice in governance models. On one hand, the charter school offers the promise of a focused, mission-driven, expert-led organization that can move quickly, but at the risk of operating in the shadows, with limited public accountability. On the other hand, the public school offers the guarantee of democratic control and transparency, but at the risk of political gridlock, bureaucracy, and a culture that is often resistant to necessary innovation. One is a speedboat that might be captained by a visionary or a pirate. The other is a massive barge, slow and steady, that requires a huge community effort to even slightly change its course. The fundamental question is, which structure is more likely to create a great school? But the structure of the boardroom is only half the story, because the most important decisions don't happen there. They happen in the classroom, and the debate over who gets to be in that classroom, how they're treated, and what they're allowed to teach is just as fierce. Let's meet two teachers. Both are passionate, dedicated, and believe deeply in the power of education. They work just a few miles apart, but their professional lives exist in different universes. First, there's Sarah, a 5th grade teacher at Northwood Elementary, a traditional public school. She's been teaching for 12 years. She has a master's degree in elementary education and is a member of the local teachers union. For Sarah, this structure provides a critical safety net. Her salary is determined by a transparent, district-wide scale based on her years of experience and level of education. She knows exactly what she'll make next year, and the year after that. Her health benefits are solid. After a few years, she earned tenure, which means she has significant job protection and can't be fired without just cause and a lengthy due process. For proponents of the public school model, this is the entire point. This system is designed to create stability. It treats teaching as a long-term professional career, not a temporary gig. The union protects teachers like Sarah from the whims of a new principal or politically motivated school board members. It ensures that an experienced, effective teacher isn't replaced by a cheaper, younger one just to save a few bucks on the district budget. This security, they argue, allows teachers to focus on teaching, to take professional risks, and to advocate for their students without fear of reprisal. But there's a flip side to Sarah's world. That same system that protects her also protects the teacher down the hall who shows movies every Friday and hasn't updated his lesson plan since 2005. The tenure system, critics argue, can make it nearly impossible to remove ineffective educators, a phenomenon sometimes called the dance of the lemons, where bad teachers are just shuffled from school to school instead of being removed. Sarah also has very little control over her curriculum. The district mandates which reading program she has to use, how many minutes a day she must spend on math, and the pacing of every single unit. She has a brilliant idea for a project-based learning unit about local history, but it doesn't fit the district's rigid schedule. Her creativity is boxed in by bureaucracy. Her professional life is stable, but it's also standardized. Now let's travel 3 miles down the road to the Innovation Academy, a charter school. Here we meet David, who also teaches 5th grade. David used to be a software engineer. He was passionate about coding and robotics, but he felt a calling to teach. The charter school, which focuses on STEM, was thrilled to hire him. Unlike Sarah, David doesn't have a traditional teaching degree or a state certification. The charter's flexibility allowed them to hire him based on his real-world expertise in a high-demand field. David is not in a union. He's an at-will employee, meaning his contract is renewed year to year, and he can be let go for almost any reason. His salary isn't based on a fixed scale. It's negotiated with the principal, and it includes performance bonuses tied to his students' test scores and classroom evaluations. This is the charter school promise in action. It's a meritocracy. Proponents say this model rewards excellence and weeds out mediocrity. If you're a great teacher like David, you can potentially earn more than a public school teacher with the same experience. There's a culture of high expectations because everyone knows their job is on the line. And David has incredible freedom. He built his entire science curriculum from scratch. His students aren't just reading about robotics. They're building and programming their own robots to solve real-world problems. The school's motto is innovate or stagnate, and David embodies it. He works long hours, collaborates constantly with his colleagues, and feels a thrilling sense of ownership over his classroom. But David's world has a dark side too. The pressure is immense. The at-will employment that's supposed to foster excellence also creates a constant state of anxiety. He saw 2 colleagues let go last year, not because they were bad teachers, but because their students' test scores didn't rise as quickly as the administration wanted. The focus on data and metrics can feel relentless. The long hours and lower starting pay compared to what he made as an engineer lead to burnout. Teacher turnover at the Innovation Academy is notoriously high. While David is there now, pouring his heart and soul into his students, there's no guarantee he'll be there in 2 years. His professional life is dynamic, but it's also deeply precarious. This brings us to one of the most fundamental divides between these two worlds: teacher certification. In the public system, the state says you need a license to teach, just like you need a license to be a doctor or a lawyer. This requires specific coursework in child psychology, pedagogy, and classroom management, along with student teaching experience. The argument is simple. Knowing a subject is not the same as knowing how to teach it to a child. Certification ensures a baseline of professional preparation and protects students from unqualified instructors. It's a quality control mechanism. The charter world often sees this differently. They argue that certification rules are a form of protectionism created by universities and unions to control the teacher supply. They believe these rules filter out brilliant people like David, the engineer, the artist, the scientist, who could be phenomenal teachers but don't want to spend 2 years and thousands of dollars getting a traditional education degree. For them, what matters is passion and content mastery. They believe they can teach a smart person how to manage a classroom, but they can't teach a certified teacher to be passionate about computer science. It's a choice between pedagogical credentials and real-world expertise. So who's right? The answer, as always, depends on what you value. Do you value the stability and standardized quality control of the public school system, even if it means less flexibility and the potential to protect underperforming teachers? Or do you value the innovation, autonomy, and performance-driven culture of the charter school system, even if it means less job security, higher teacher turnover, and instructors who may have never taken a single class on child development? These are not just abstract policy questions. The teacher at the front of the room is the single most important school-related factor in a child's academic success. The difference between a great teacher and an average one can change a student's entire life trajectory. A stable, experienced teacher like Sarah can provide a sense of security and consistency that is vital for many children. A dynamic, innovative teacher like David can ignite a passion that a standardized curriculum might have extinguished. Conversely, a student stuck with a burnt-out, tenured teacher in the public system can lose a critical year of learning. And a student in a charter school might have 3 different math teachers in 3 years due to high turnover, shattering any sense of continuity. The very policies that define a teacher's career, unions, tenure, at-will employment, certification, reverberate directly into the classroom, shaping the daily experience of millions of children. The debate over who gets to teach and under what conditions is a battle of competing philosophies. Is teaching a protected civil service, or is it a competitive, results-driven profession? Is it a lifelong craft built on experience and security? Or is it a dynamic field that demands constant innovation and tolerates no mediocrity? The systems we've built, both public and charter, are a reflection of these deeply held and often contradictory beliefs. But the teacher, no matter how talented or dedicated, is only one part of the equation. What they are actually allowed to teach is a battleground all its own. The books they can assign, the history they can discuss, the very facts they can present are now at the center of a raging cultural war. And the primary weapon in that war is the standardized test. Because what gets tested gets taught. And the fight over what gets taught is nothing less than a fight for the future. So how did a simple bubble-in test become a weapon? How did a scant-run sheet become the primary battlefield for the soul of American education? To understand that, we have to go back. Not to the very first standardized test, but to the moment they went from being a quiet diagnostic tool to a high-stakes front-page obsession. The stage was set in 1983, with a terrifying report from the federal government titled, "A Nation at Risk." It declared a rising tide of mediocrity in our schools that threatened our very future as a nation. The message was clear. Our public schools were failing and something drastic had to be done. For the next 2 decades, the idea of accountability became the central theme of education reform. The logic seemed simple. We pour billions of tax dollars into schools. We should be able to measure what we're getting for our money. We need a yardstick. And in 2002, that yardstick became law. It was called the No Child Left Behind Act, or NCLB. It was a massive piece of bipartisan legislation that fundamentally rewired the entire American education system. Its goal was noble: to close the achievement gap between wealthy and poor students, and between white students and students of color. And its method was direct: test everyone, every year, from 3rd grade to 8th grade, and once in high school, every single public school student would take a state-mandated standardized test in reading and math. But here's the crucial part. The law attached very real, very high stakes to those scores. Schools had to show adequate yearly progress, or AYP, for all their student subgroups. If your school's scores were flat, you were a school in need of improvement. If they didn't go up after a few years, you could be labeled a failing school. That label came with consequences. Students could be offered free transfers to better schools. The school could be forced to restructure, fire its staff, or even be taken over by the state. Suddenly, the test wasn't just a test. It was a verdict. It was a judgment on teachers, principals, and entire communities. And into this high-pressure, high-stakes environment, the modern charter school movement exploded. Because in a world where everything was being reduced to a single number, charter schools had a powerful story to tell. They were the innovators, the disruptors, free from the bureaucracy of the traditional public school district. And they had the data to prove it. Or so it seemed. The test score became the ultimate marketing tool. A charter school could put up a billboard or send out a mailer that said, "Our fourth graders score 20 points higher in math than the district average." For a parent worried their child is trapped in a failing school, that message is incredibly compelling. Simple, it's clear, and it feels objective. It cuts through all the complexity of what makes a school good and boils it down to a single comparable metric. This gave rise to the no excuses charter model, famously pioneered by networks like KIPP. These schools often featured longer school days, stricter discipline, and an intense, relentless focus on the fundamentals of reading and math, the two subjects on the test. And for many students it worked. These schools posted remarkable gains, taking children from some of the nation's most disadvantaged neighborhoods and producing test scores that rivaled those in the wealthy suburbs. They became the poster children for education reform, proof that poverty was not destiny, and that the right school model could overcome any obstacle. The test scores were their validation, their shield against critics, and their engine for growth. But while one side was celebrating a data-driven revolution, another was sounding the alarm. They warned of a dark underbelly to this new testing regime. They argued that when you make a single test the sole measure of success, you don't magically get better schools. You just get schools that are really, really good at preparing kids for that one test. This is the phenomenon known as teaching to the test. And it's not just about doing a few practice questions before the exam. It's a fundamental narrowing of the entire curriculum. If science, history, art, and music aren't on the test, they become secondary. They become luxuries. Instructional time is reallocated. A fascinating history lesson gets replaced with a drill on identifying the main idea in a paragraph. A hands-on science experiment is shelved in favor of a worksheet on interpreting data in a chart. Teachers whose own job security and pay could now be tied to their students' scores were forced to become test prep technicians rather than educators. Creativity, critical thinking, and a genuine love of learning, things that can't be measured by a multiple-choice question, were often casualties of the war for higher scores. The pressure on students was immense. Test anxiety became a common diagnosis for children as young as 8 or 9. The message they received was clear. This test defines you. Your score is a measure of your worth, your intelligence. And then there was the question of fairness. Critics argued that standardized tests are often a better measure of a student's zip code than their actual knowledge. A child who comes from a stable, two-parent home with books on the shelves, access to computers, and parents who can afford tutors will almost always have an advantage. The tests, they claimed, weren't leveling the playing field. They were just reflecting the inequalities that already existed in society and stamping them with the seal of scientific objectivity. This is also where one of the most serious accusations against certain charter schools emerged: the charge of creaming and cropping. Creaming is the idea that some charters, through their application and lottery processes, subtly attract the most motivated students and engaged families, leaving the traditional public schools with a higher concentration of the most challenging students. Cropping is even more controversial. It's the allegation that some schools push out or counsel out students who are difficult to teach, those with severe learning disabilities, behavioral problems, or those who simply aren't going to score well on the test, in order to protect the school's all-important average test score. While many charter schools vehemently deny these practices and serve all students who walk through their doors, documented cases and statistical analyses have shown that it does happen, complicating the narrative that their high scores are purely the result of superior instruction. By the mid-2010s, a widespread backlash against high-stakes testing had taken hold. Parents, teachers, and even some policymakers began to recognize that the obsession with testing had gone too far. In 2015, the No Child Left Behind Act was replaced by the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA. This new law was a direct response to the criticisms of NCLB. It kept the requirement for annual testing, but it gave significant power back to the states. States were now encouraged to use multiple measures to evaluate schools, not just test scores. Things like student engagement, school climate surveys, and access to advanced coursework could be included. It was an admission that a single test couldn't possibly capture the full picture of what makes a school successful. Yet, the legacy of the testing era is powerful and persistent. Test scores are still the easiest, most visible metric we have. They still drive real estate prices on websites like Zillow. They still dominate the headlines. And they still form the core of the argument for and against charter schools. The debate is now a fundamental conflict of values. Are these tests an indispensable tool for accountability, ensuring that taxpayer money is well spent and that vulnerable students aren't being ignored? Or are they a flawed, biased, and destructive force that has narrowed our definition of education and turned our schools into pressure cookers? The answer to that question depends on what you believe the purpose of school truly is. Is it to produce a quantifiable result, a score that can be ranked and sorted? Or is it something less tangible, something harder to measure? Is it to cultivate curiosity, resilience, and citizenship? That is the choice at the heart of the matter, because the metrics we choose to value don't just measure our schools. They shape them. They tell our children what we think is truly important. And so we arrive at the 500-pound gorilla in the room. The one question that ignites more ferocious debate than any other: money. Because how a society chooses to spend its money is the most honest reflection of what it truly values. And in the battle between charter and public schools, the central explosive accusation is this: do charter schools drain money from traditional public schools, leaving them to starve? The answer isn't a simple yes or no. It's a labyrinth of funding formulas, political interests, and unintended consequences. To understand it, you have to follow the dollar. Imagine a traditional public school district. Its funding is a cocktail, mixed from three main ingredients: local property taxes, state aid, and a smaller amount of federal money. The most important piece of this puzzle for our discussion is that a huge portion of state and local funding is allocated on a per-pupil basis. Think of it as a backpack of cash, somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 depending on the state, that is metaphorically strapped to every single student. Wherever that student goes to a public school, that backpack of cash goes with them to pay for their education. Now, for decades this was simple. All the kids in a town went to the town's public schools, so all the backpacks of cash stayed within the district. But then charter schools arrived. As public schools themselves, they argued for a simple, powerful idea: the money should follow the child. If a parent decides the local public school isn't the right fit and chooses a public charter school instead, why should their tax dollars stay behind? It's their child, their money. It's an argument rooted in the American ideals of choice and free market competition. Let the best school win the students and with them the funding. On the surface, it sounds perfectly fair. A one-for-one trade. One student leaves, one backpack of cash leaves. Simple. But here is where the reality on the ground gets incredibly complicated. Let's go back to our traditional public school, Lincoln Elementary. Lincoln Elementary has massive fixed costs. It has a mortgage on the building, a heating bill that doesn't care how many students are inside, a principal's salary, a school nurse, and a team of janitors. It runs bus routes across the entire neighborhood. And critically, it has a legal mandate to serve every single child who walks through its doors, including those with the most profound and expensive-to-manage disabilities. Now, a new charter school, let's call it Innovate Academy, opens a mile down the road. It's new, it's shiny, and it promises a specialized curriculum. Over the summer, 30 students from Lincoln Elementary unenroll and sign up for Innovate Academy. According to the money follows the child rule, 30 backpacks of cash disappear from Lincoln Elementary's budget. Let's say each backpack is worth $15,000. That's $450,000 gone. But did Lincoln Elementary's costs go down by $450,000? Not even close. The mortgage is the same. The heating bill is the same. The principal still needs to be paid. The school nurse can't just work 10% less of the time. This is what economists call stranded costs. The school loses the full revenue of those 30 students, but it can't shed a proportional amount of its expenses. It can't fire 1.5 teachers. It can't sell the back corner of the library. It can't shut off the lights in 3 empty classroom seats. The result is a slow, painful squeeze. The first year, maybe the art teacher position is cut. The second year, the librarian becomes part-time, and the school nurse is shared with another school. Class sizes for the remaining students begin to creep up from 25 to 28, then to 30. The school is caught in a financial death spiral. As resources dwindle, the school becomes less attractive, prompting more families to leave for the charter school, which pulls even more funding out of the system, which leads to more cuts. This is what critics mean when they say charters drain public schools. It's not a direct transfer. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And there's another, even more troubling layer to this. Under federal law, traditional public schools have an ironclad obligation to educate every child, no matter their need. They are the ultimate safety net. If a child has severe autism, requires a one-on-one aid, and needs thousands of dollars in specialized services, the public school must provide it. Charter schools are also legally bound by these same laws, but the reality can be very different. Numerous studies and reports have found that, on average, charter schools enroll a lower percentage of students with severe disabilities than their public school counterparts. The reasons are complex. Sometimes charters simply lack the specialized staff and expensive infrastructure. Other times, critics allege a more deliberate process of counseling out, or cream skimming, where students who are difficult or expensive to educate are subtly encouraged to return to the traditional public school system that is better equipped to handle them. The result is a system that can become financially toxic for public schools. The charter school may attract students who are, on average, less expensive to educate, yet they receive the same standard per pupil funding. Meanwhile, the traditional public school is left with a higher concentration of the most high-need, most expensive to educate students, but with a rapidly shrinking budget to serve them. The public school's financial burden increases while its resources are simultaneously stripped away. Of course, charter advocates have a powerful rebuttal. They argue that this isn't their fault. It's the fault of a bloated, inefficient public school bureaucracy. They argue that they are often at a disadvantage themselves, as most charters don't get dedicated funding for facilities. They have to pay rent or mortgages out of their general operating funds, that per pupil backpack of cash, while traditional public schools have their buildings paid for by separate local bonds. They see themselves as lean, agile innovators, and if the old system can't compete, it needs to adapt, not be protected. The competition, they argue, is the point. It forces everyone to get better. But the line between healthy competition and predatory practice can get blurry, especially when profit enters the picture. While charter schools themselves must be nonprofits, a huge number of them are run by for-profit companies called Education Management Organizations, or EMOs. This creates a whole new set of incentives. Some of these for-profit EMOs have been found to create subsidiary real estate companies. This is how it works. The EMO creates a side company that buys a building. That side company then leases the building back to the charter school that the EMO is managing, often at an inflated, above-market rate. The money for the lease comes from the public, per pupil funding that was supposed to be for educating children. It flows from the school to the EMO's real estate company and ends up as profit in the pockets of private investors. The taxpayer is essentially subsidizing a private real estate investment under the guise of education reform. So when we ask if charter schools drain public schools, the answer we find is a messy one. In a purely mechanical sense, yes, the funding model inherently moves money out of the district school when a student leaves. The devastating impact of stranded costs is a mathematical reality for any district experiencing an exodus of students. The disproportionate sorting of high-need students can create a deep financial inequity. But charter advocates would argue this isn't a drain. It's choice. It's the sound of parents voting with their feet, and their tax dollars rightfully following them. The real question we're left with is one of intent and impact. Is this a system designed to create innovative new options that lift all boats? Or is it a system that, intentionally or not, creates a parallel structure that siphons resources, leaves the most vulnerable students behind, and in some cases allows private companies to turn a profit from public education dollars? The debate over funding isn't just about spreadsheets and budget lines. It's about the kind of public commons we want to have. Do we believe in a unified system responsible for every single child, or a marketplace of individual schools competing for individual consumers? The answer to that question reveals not just what we think about schools, but what we believe about the nature of community itself. And this brings us to the central nervous system of the entire debate, the question of accountability. Who answers for a child's education? When a school fails, who is held responsible and how? The models that public and charter schools use to answer this question are fundamentally, almost philosophically different. They represent two competing visions for how to run a public good. Let's start with the traditional public school. Its accountability structure is like the government of a small town. It is, by design, democratic. The ultimate authority rests with the community itself, exercised through an elected school board. These are your neighbors, the local dentist, the retired accountant, the stay-at-home parent, who run for office, make their case to the public, and if elected are entrusted with overseeing the entire district. Their meetings are public. Their budgets are public records. If you have a problem with a policy, you can go to a school board meeting and speak your mind for 3 minutes at the podium. If you don't like the decisions the board is making, you and your community can vote them out in the next election. The district superintendent, the person who actually runs the schools day to day, is accountable to that elected board. The principals are accountable to the superintendent. The teachers are accountable to the principals. It's a clear top-down hierarchy, but the very top of that pyramid is the public itself. This system is built on the principle of public oversight. The money comes from taxpayers, and so the taxpayers, through their elected representatives, get the final say. The pro of this system is its transparency and democratic nature. It is, in theory, an institution of the people by the people for the people. The con, as anyone who has ever attended a contentious school board meeting can attest, is that it can be incredibly slow, inefficient, and political. Democratic processes are often messy. Making a significant change, like closing a chronically underperforming school, can become a political firestorm that drags on for years. Powerful interests, from teachers' unions protecting jobs to nostalgic alumni fighting to save their old building, can create a kind of institutional inertia. Firing an ineffective tenured teacher can be a monumentally difficult and expensive process. The system designed to ensure public control can sometimes become a bureaucratic fortress that is highly resistant to rapid change. Even when that change is desperately needed, it's a giant ship, and turning it even a few degrees requires immense, coordinated effort. Now let's look at the charter school model. It throws that small-town government structure out the window and replaces it with something that looks a lot more like a startup company. A charter school is not directly accountable to an elected school board or the local voters. Instead, it's accountable to two main forces: its authorizer and the market. The authorizer is the entity that grants the school its charter, its license to operate. This could be a state university, a state education agency, or a special independent board. The charter is a performance contract. It says, "We will educate this many students, and we will achieve these specific academic results. In exchange, you give us public funding and freedom from many district regulations." If the school meets the goals in its contract, its charter is renewed, typically every 3 to 5 years. If it fails to meet those goals, if test scores are too low, if finances are a mess, if it violates the terms of its contract, the authorizer can and often does revoke the charter. The school is shut down. End of story. This is the first layer of accountability, and its proponents argue it's far more rigorous than the public system. There's no political gridlock. It's a simple contractual question. Did you meet your performance targets? Yes or no? This allows for the swift closure of failing schools, something that's notoriously difficult in the traditional system. The second, and perhaps more powerful layer of accountability is the market. Parents choose to send their children to a charter school. If the school is bad, if the teachers are poor, the culture is toxic, or the results aren't there, parents can vote with their feet. They can pull their child out and enroll them somewhere else. Because funding is tied directly to enrollment, when students leave, the money leaves with them. A mass exodus of students can be a death sentence for a charter school. This creates a powerful incentive to be responsive to parents and to deliver a high-quality product. If you don't keep your customers, the families happy, you go out of business. The pro of this model is its agility and its clear, bottom-line focus on results. It's a fleet of speedboats instead of one giant ship. They can innovate, try new teaching methods, and specialize in serving specific student populations. And if one of those speedboats starts taking on water, it can be scuttled without affecting the rest of the fleet. This no excuses approach is a core part of the charter school promise. But this model has a significant downside, and it's a big one: a potential lack of public transparency and oversight. The board of directors for a charter school is typically not elected. It's a self-appointed group, much like the board of any nonprofit organization. Their meetings are not always required to be open to the public. Their financial records can be much harder to scrutinize, especially when they hire a for-profit education management organization, or EMO, to run the school's daily operations. This is where things can get murky. Suddenly, public tax dollars are flowing from a government agency to a nonprofit school board, and then to a private for-profit company. That company's goal, by definition, is to make a profit for its shareholders. This raises critical questions. How much of the per-pupil funding is actually going into the classroom, and how much is being skimmed off the top for executive salaries or administrative fees? Is the EMO hiring non-certified, lower-paid teachers to cut costs? Is the school leasing a building from a real estate company owned by one of its own board members? These aren't just hypotheticals. These scenarios have played out in charter school scandals across the country, leading to accusations of fraud, embezzlement, and self-dealing. While the vast majority of charter schools are run by dedicated educators with the best of intentions, the structure itself creates vulnerabilities. The authorizer, who is supposed to be the watchdog, might be understaffed, or might be a close partner with the very schools it's supposed to be overseeing. And when the customers are families who may lack the time or resources to investigate a school's complex financial dealings, market accountability alone may not be enough to prevent abuse. So we are left with two starkly different philosophies. The public school system champions democratic accountability. It's often slow and frustrating, but it guarantees every citizen a seat at the table. It assumes that the education of our children is a collective responsibility, a public trust that must be managed in the open, by the community as a whole. The charter school system champions market-based accountability. It's fast, performance-driven, and empowers individual families with choice. It assumes that education can be improved through competition and innovation, and that bad schools should be allowed to fail just like any other bad business. This isn't just a technical debate about governance models. It's a fundamental conflict of visions. Do we trust in the slow, messy, but transparent mechanisms of democracy? Or do we trust in the fast, efficient, but more opaque power of the free market? The answer determines who holds the power, who controls the money, and ultimately, who gets to decide what a school is and who it truly serves. And that's the question that cuts through all the noise, all the statistics, and all the political posturing. For a parent with a child trapped in a failing school, the debate over democratic accountability versus market efficiency feels distant, almost insulting. They're not thinking about the long-term health of the public commons. They're thinking about their child's one shot at a future. If a charter school down the street promises safety, order, and a better chance at college, the choice seems obvious. The immediate, tangible promise of a better life for their own child will almost always outweigh a philosophical commitment to a system that they feel has already failed them. But let's pull back from that desperate parent's choice for a moment and look at the people on the front lines, the ones tasked with making either system work, the teachers. Their experience reveals a fundamental divide in the philosophy of education itself. In a traditional public school, a teacher is typically part of a union. That union contract is a fortress. It provides job security through tenure, guarantees salary schedules based on experience and education, and sets clear limits on working hours. This creates stability. It protects teachers from arbitrary firing by a new principal with a personal grudge, and it allows them to advocate for resources and speak out against bad policy without fear of reprisal. This is the argument for unions. They professionalize teaching, transforming it from a mere job into a career, attracting people who want to dedicate their lives to it. But that fortress can also become a cage. Critics argue that tenure can protect ineffective teachers, making it incredibly difficult to remove someone who is simply not good at their job. The rigid salary schedules mean a phenomenal, once-in-a-generation teacher is paid the same as a mediocre one with the same years of experience. The system can feel bureaucratic, slow to adapt, and sometimes, it prioritizes the security of the adult employees over the dynamic needs of the students. Now, step into the world of a charter school. For a teacher, it's often the exact opposite. The vast majority of charter schools are non-unionized. Teachers are at-will employees, meaning they can be fired for any reason, or no reason at all. The pay is often determined by the administration, sometimes with performance bonuses tied to student test scores. The hours are frequently longer, with the expectation that teachers are available by phone or email late into the evening. The promise is one of freedom and innovation. Without the constraints of a union contract or a district-wide curriculum, teachers and principals are free to experiment, to tailor their teaching methods, to create a unique and dynamic school culture. It's an environment that attracts young, energetic, and idealistic educators who want to change the world. But this freedom comes at a staggering cost: burnout. The teacher turnover rate in charter schools is significantly higher than in traditional public schools. The constant pressure to raise test scores, the long hours, and the lack of job security create a churn-and-burn environment. A teacher might pour their heart and soul into their students for 2 or 3 years, only to leave the profession entirely, exhausted and disillusioned. And this constant churn is devastating for students. It breaks the bonds of trust and mentorship, and it destabilizes the entire school community. So we have two models. One of stability that risks stagnation, and one of innovation that risks collapse. And this brings us to the students themselves, the very people this grand experiment is supposed to serve. Here we encounter one of the most explosive accusations leveled against the charter school movement: the concept of cream skimming. The charge is this: charter schools, intentionally or not, often enroll students who are easier and cheaper to educate, leaving traditional public schools with a higher concentration of the most challenging students. Imagine a public school is a giant, all-purpose hospital emergency room. It is legally, morally, and ethically required to take in every single person who comes through the doors, no matter their condition. The gunshot victim, the person with a common cold, the patient with a complex multi-year rare disease, they all get treated. The hospital can't turn anyone away. Now imagine a specialized clinic opens up down the street. It's sleek, efficient, and gets amazing results. But it only specializes in treating the common cold and minor sprains. It doesn't have the equipment or staff for trauma surgery or chronic disease management. So it takes the easiest patients from the ER. The clinic's success rates look fantastic, and people start saying, why can't the public hospital be more like that efficient clinic? But the hospital is now left with only the most difficult, most expensive cases, and its overall success rates plummet. It looks like it's failing when in reality its job just got exponentially harder. This is the cream skimming argument in a nutshell. Public schools are bound by federal law, specifically the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, to provide a free and appropriate education for every child, including those with severe physical, emotional, and learning disabilities. This is an expensive, difficult, and morally essential mandate. Charter schools are also legally required to accept these students. However, critics argue that many have subtle ways of counseling them out. They might lack the specialized staff, the speech pathologists, occupational therapists, and special education teachers that these students require. A parent might be told, "We'd love to have Johnny here, but we just don't have the resources to give him the support he truly needs. He might be better served back at his neighborhood public school." It's not an outright rejection, but the message is clear. Furthermore, some charters have strict disciplinary codes, often under the banner of a no-excuses philosophy. A student who struggles with behavioral issues, often stemming from trauma or an undiagnosed disability, might quickly accumulate demerits for minor infractions like not having their shirt tucked in or failing to make eye contact, and be pushed out. Add to that the fact that many charter schools require significant parental involvement or don't provide transportation, creating barriers for students from the most unstable homes. The result is that the students who need the most help are often filtered out of the charter system and concentrated back into the public schools, which then have their budgets cut because their enrollment is declining. It becomes a death spiral. This isn't to say all charter schools do this. Many do a phenomenal job with very challenging student populations. But the structure of the system, one of choice and competition, creates the incentive to do it. Finally, we have to ask what happens to the community when a school is no longer a public trust, but a private enterprise. A neighborhood public school is more than just a place of learning. It's often the heart of a community. It's a polling place on election day. It's where local groups hold their meetings. It's the home of the high school football team that brings the whole town together on a Friday night. It is a shared public space, an anchor of civic life that serves everyone, whether they have children enrolled there or not. When that school is closed due to low enrollment and replaced by a charter school that draws students from all over the city, that community anchor vanishes. The building might still be there, but its function as a shared public institution is gone. The new school isn't accountable to the neighborhood voters. It's accountable to its board of directors. It doesn't necessarily see its role as serving the entire community, but as serving its specific customers, the students it has chosen to enroll. The very fabric of a neighborhood can be weakened when its school ceases to be a public good and becomes a private service. So the debate isn't just about test scores. It's not just about graduation rates. It's a battle over fundamentally different visions for society. One vision sees education as a public good, a shared responsibility, a cornerstone of democratic life that must serve every single person, no matter the cost. The other sees education as a service, a consumer good that can be improved through competition, innovation, and the power of the free market, providing better options for individual families. Both visions are trying to solve a real and desperate problem, but the paths they take lead to vastly different destinations, not just for our students but for our country. So where does this leave us? We stand at a crossroads, faced with two fundamentally different blueprints for the future of American education. One path doubles down on the public school as the civic cornerstone of a community, imperfect, yes, but essential. A shared space where children from all walks of life learn together, where society invests collectively in its own future. The other path charts a course through the open waters of the free market, arguing that competition and choice are the tides that lift all boats. It champions the right of parents to find the perfect fit for their child, even if it means sailing away from the traditional harbor. This isn't just an abstract policy debate. For millions of parents, it is the most personal, high-stakes decision they will ever make. It's the agonizing choice between the school down the street that all the neighborhood kids attend and the charter school across town with a specialized curriculum and a lottery system that feels like playing the slots with your child's future. It's a conflict between two powerful American ideals: the commitment to the common good and the fierce, protective pursuit of the best for one's own family. So, if you are that parent staring at applications and school rankings until your eyes blur, what do you do? The answer isn't to pick a side in the public versus charter war. The answer is to ignore the labels and start a forensic investigation of your own. First, you have to look at your child. Not the child you hope they'll be, but the child who is sitting right in front of you. Are they a self-starter who would thrive in a project-based learning environment? Or do they need the structure and routine of a more traditional classroom? Do they have a burning passion for STEM, the arts, or a specific language that a specialized charter might ignite? Or do they have a learning disability that requires the robust, legally mandated support systems that a well-funded public school district is often better equipped to provide? The single most important factor is not the school's mission statement. It's the fit between the school's actual, day-to-day reality and your child's unique wiring. Second, you have to investigate the specific schools. The words public and charter have become lazy shorthand for a vast and diverse reality. There are phenomenal, world-class public schools and disastrous, mismanaged charter schools. And the reverse is just as true. So, you have to become a detective. Don't just look at test scores. Look at teacher turnover rates. A school that can't keep its teachers is a school with a broken culture. Ask to see the curriculum. Is it rich and engaging? Or is it a stripped-down teach-to-the-test workbook? Talk to other parents, not just the ones the administration directs you to. Find the parents in the parking lot at pickup time. Ask them what they love and what drives them crazy. And most importantly, visit the school. Walk the halls. Feel the energy. Is it a place of joyful curiosity or anxious compliance? Is it a place you can imagine your child spending 7 hours a day, 5 days a week for the most formative years of their life? Third, and this is the hardest part, you have to consider your community. This is where the personal decision collides with the civic one. Choosing to send your child to a charter school might be the best choice for them. But what does it mean for the public school down the street? Does your departure take vital funding and an engaged family out of a system that desperately needs both? Or does your choice send a powerful message to the district that they must improve to compete? Conversely, choosing to stay and fight for your local public school is a noble act of civic engagement. But you have to ask yourself, is it fair to sacrifice your own child's immediate educational needs on the altar of a long-term community goal that may or may not be realized? There are no easy answers here. Anyone who tells you there are is selling something. This is a genuine dilemma, a place where individual liberty and collective responsibility are in direct tension. And as we zoom out from the individual family to the nation as a whole, the future becomes even more complex. The debate is pushing both systems to evolve. In response to the charter movement, some public school districts are innovating like never before. They're creating their own specialized magnet schools, adopting new teaching methods, and offering more choices within the public framework. We're seeing the rise of community schools, public schools that become neighborhood hubs, offering everything from healthcare and dental clinics to adult education classes and food pantries. They are redefining what it means to be a public institution, wrapping their arms around the entire community to address the deep-seated issues of poverty that impact learning. At the same time, the charter movement itself is maturing. The Wild West days of unchecked expansion are, in many states, being replaced by a demand for greater accountability and transparency. There's a growing recognition that choice alone is not a silver bullet. Quality is what matters. The best charter networks are now focused on codifying what works and sharing those lessons, not just with other charters, but with traditional public schools as well. They see themselves not as replacements, but as research and development labs for American education. So what is the ultimate takeaway from this decade-spanning, politically charged battle for the soul of American education? Perhaps it's this: the problem was never the model. The problem was our tolerance for mediocrity. For generations, we have allowed underfunded, undersupported, and underperforming schools to fail children, particularly those in our most vulnerable communities. The charter school movement, for all its flaws and controversies, was a siren, a loud, blaring alarm that woke us up to the fact that millions of families were desperate for something better. The path forward is not to choose a victor in the public versus charter war. The path forward is to demand excellence from every single school, regardless of its label. It's to demand the things we know work: high quality, well-paid and respected teachers, rich, engaging and challenging curricula, proper funding that is both adequate and equitable, and strong leadership that creates a culture of support and high expectations. This means the real work for you doesn't end with choosing a school for your child. It begins there. Whether you choose a public school or a charter school, your responsibility is to be involved. Go to the school board meetings. Join the Parent-Teacher Association. Volunteer in the classroom. Read to the kids. Mentor a student. Advocate for funding at the local, state, and federal level. The most powerful force for change in education is not a new policy or a different type of school. It is an army of engaged, informed, and relentlessly demanding parents and citizens. The schoolhouse, in whatever form it takes, is the crucible of our democracy. It is where we forge the citizens, the innovators, the leaders, and the dreamers of tomorrow. The debate between public and charter schools is not a distraction from this mission. It is a heated, messy, and profoundly necessary argument about how best to fulfill it. The promise of a quality education for every child is the most sacred promise America makes to its people. And it is a promise that is and always will be ours to keep.